Welcome to Bible Study. This is the Bible study which we are preparing for St. Michael's Lutheran Church on the 14th of June in 2026. We've been looking at the various books of the Bible that maybe didn't quite make it in, or at least not into the Bible that we read. We've started with some of the Old Testament books from the Apocrypha and some of those that even are a little outside of that some people have thought should be Bible and didn't make it in there. With the Old Testament, it's a kind of a different story because we have a lot less data. We have a lot less information. When we come to the New Testament, on the other hand, we have a much better data set to understand some of this process. And we can probably say a little bit more. Of course, do we have a complete data set? Most likely not. And there undoubtedly are a lot of gaps in this. But we do have some information about this. I'm standing today in front of this pyramid, and that's for a reason. This is a Jerusalem cross on that green field right there. And you'll notice that it's really made up of a number of crosses in a pattern together. The big main cross goes out equally in all four directions. And that's kind of the idea. The gospel goes out everywhere. But in each of the four quadrants of the cross, there's another small cross. And those are to represent the four Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That has been a quartet inside the Christian movement from, time immemorial. We have no idea, we have no record or any recollection of a church that doesn't know those four books. You might say Acts, I suppose, but really, we don't know of any church that doesn't know those four. We know that they were collected together very early. We have fragmentary copies of them that when we lay them one on top of each other, we can see that they were actually stitched together into one book, and that they were circulating as a single text as early as the early 2nd century, late 1st century perhaps. We know, by the way, the same thing for the letters of Paul, that they also had been collected and bound together into a single book and were circulating as a single book inside the earliest Christian communities. What we know about this process, though, is that an event took place in the middle of the 2nd century, so around 140, 150 or so. A fellow shows up who is the wealthy son of a shipbuilder from a place called Pontus. And Pontus is a colony or a part of the Roman Empire. It sits in northern Turkey today, right on the Black Sea, kind of straight across from the Crimean Peninsula, if you've followed any of the events around the Ukraine war. This fellow came to Rome and brought with him, of course, a great deal of wealth, and made a large donation to the Poor Widow Fund in Rome. And when you make a large donation, you kind of get the bishop's ear a little bit, and he used that. He had things he wanted to say. His name was Marcion, and Marcion had some really odd ideas about God. He thought there were two gods. He thought there was a bad Old Testament God who was all into sacrifices and vengeance and justice and retribution, and he was kind of a nasty God. And then there was a nicer, gentler, kinder, gracious New Testament God. And that what happened was that much of the ideas of that nasty Old Testament God had infected the books that the Christian church were using. And so he really didn't think we should be reading them. For Marcion, he had a redacted copy of the Gospel according to Luke, so a shorter version of Luke, and then he had 10 of Paul's letters. So it was an 11-book Bible. And he said, these are the ones that really and accurately reflect this new God, this Jesus God, who was gracious and kind. Well, the Bishop of Rome, to his credit, said, yeah, no, I don't think so, Marcion. we're just not going to go there. And to his credit, he also, by the way, gave the money back. Returned the money to Marcion and just said, Marcion, no, that's not Christian, what you're saying. That's not part of who we are. Marcion went on then to start a competing movement, a competing church. He claimed that he was Christian, but clearly he wasn't. But yet, some of his ideas really made a lot of sense to people who were coming out of the Greco-Roman world and stepping into this rather strange Old Testament world of the Jewish church. And there were people there who really wondered about stories like, Abraham nearly sacrificing Isaac, and David slaughtering all of these people, and they said they were having a hard time reconciling that, and some people still do today. The Marcion movement actually grew rather popular. It never was as large as the Christian movement, but it was a significant movement for about 100 years, maybe almost 150. In response to it, what the Christian church really had to do was ask itself, what is in the Bible? What are our books of the Bible? They had received from the Jewish people the Septuagint, and that was the Old Testament, so they had that covered. They said, no, that's Bible. But which of these New Testament writings are actually Bible? Their method for doing it appears to have been that they asked. They simply went around to various churches and communities and said, when you read the Bible, what are you reading? You can read about this process in the church historian Eusebius, who wrote in the early 300s. And pretty quickly a consensus came out. The 4 Gospels, as we see here, the 13 letters of Paul that you know in your New Testament, the first letter of Peter and the first letter of John were all, and the book of Acts, were all immediately recognized as saying, that's Bible. That we're all reading that as the text of the New Testament. We're all saying this is the Word of God to us. And so that was unanimous. There were no dissenters there. But there was a small group who questioned, and they weren't all the same people. There were some who questioned 7 more of those books. Those are the second letter of Peter, the second and third letters of John, the letter to the Hebrews, the letters of Jude and James, and also the book of Revelation. They had various reasons for not thinking they belonged there, but there were some people raised questions about it. Those were in a decided minority. They did not, they by no means represented the majority of the Christian responses, but it was a small group. And this occasioned what do you do? You've got some people who don't think it's Bible and some people who think it is. How are we going to handle that? And they came up with, I think, an incredibly elegant compromise on it. They categorized these 7 books as something called the Antilegoumena. And those are simply, Antilegoumena is just the Greek word for somebody objected. Okay, objected books. These are the books that someone raised a question about. But yet, still the majority think they are. And so what they did was they included them. But they included them in a kind of subcategory of our Bible. And the category is that no doctrine, no required teaching of the church can be found only in one of these books. If I'm going to preach or teach, and by the way, this still obtains. If I'm going to preach or teach something as a pastor, and it is found in a book like James or Jude or Revelation, and it's not found anywhere else in the Bible, not in any of the accepted books like the Gospels or the letters of Paul, I'm not really supposed to say you have to believe this. I can say it's here. And there's very, very few parts of those books that fit into that kind of status or that qualification. One example would be last week in Bible study, we looked at the letter to Jude. And in Jude, it's got this little story where it's a quote from the book of Enoch, in which the devil and Saint Michael are contending over the body of Moses after Moses dies. Well, if you read the book of Deuteronomy, which records the death of Moses, and the whole rest of the Old Testament for that matter, that's always not in there. And so we can't put that in and say, well, if you're going to really be a Christian, you have to believe this story you have to accept this story about the devil and Saint Michael, contending over the body of Moses. Maybe that happened, maybe it didn't. But because it's only found there and not in the other books, I can't, as a pastor, really say, you have to believe that. I might. You might. It's perfectly acceptable too. But I can't insist on it because it's only found there. Then there were some books as well that some people were reading, but a majority of the community said, yeah, no, not any of those. And we're going to look at a couple of those next week. And then there's some other books that other people tried to add in later, and we'll look at a couple of those too. But for now, I want to look at just one of those Antilegoumena texts. There are several reasons why books were objected to. It isn't all the same. The letter to the Hebrews, for instance, struggles because we have no idea who wrote it. Was it one of the apostles? Which one? We don't know. Some people have posited maybe Barnabas wrote it. Some people have said maybe one of the other, not Paul, not Peter, not John, maybe one of the other 10 apostles wrote it. Which one? Some people have thought maybe Apollos, the young man that Paul trains. Some people have thought maybe it was Priscilla, and that's why it's anonymous, is because it was actually written by a woman. And in the first century, well, she would have to write anonymously. We just don't know. We have no idea who wrote that book. And so some people said, if we don't know who wrote it, should we count it as Bible? The second letter of Peter doesn't say anything offensive, but it is just so different than the first letter. The first letter of Peter is probably one of the most beautiful first century documents we have. I mean, not only Bible, but anywhere. It is just gorgeously written. It's written in this beautiful Greek syntax and style and the vocabulary. It is just a wonderfully reasoned and written book. The second letter of Peter is kind of a trash fire, honestly, in terms of the grammar and the spelling and all. It's just not pretty. And some people say, well, how could the same person do that? Well, it's clear in the first book that Peter had help. He even says it at the end of the book. Silvanus helped me write this. And he doesn't have help in the second one. Maybe it's even genuinely more Petrine, if you will, to read the second one. But a lot of people just raised a question. It doesn't sound like this really rises to the occasion for a biblical book. It's kind of crudely written. The second and third letters of John are just too light. there's not a whole lot there. They're super short. The letter of James may not even be a letter. It might be more a collection of sermons that was edited after he died. And the letter to Jude, as we've noted, quotes Enoch a lot. Why would you put that in the Bible if you don't accept Enoch as part of the Bible? And the last one, the book of Revelation, well, if you've read Revelation, you can see why some people might have had some questions there. It is a wild book, and maybe someday we'll have to take that one up too. But these 7, 2 letters of John, 1 letter of Peter, Hebrews, James, Jude, and the book of Revelation, were all put into this category of Antilegoumena. Let's look at one of them, and I mean, let's look at the shortest one of them all. That's 3 John. And the reason that they said maybe not is because this letter just doesn't seem to, well, say very much. And it doesn't certainly say anything that isn't somewhere else. Should we count this as God's word to us? The elder, that's John, to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. And so this is John writing to a guy named Gaius. Beloved, I pray that all may go well with you, and that you may be in good health, as it goes well with your soul. For I rejoiced greatly when the brothers came and testified to your truth, as indeed you are walking in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear about that my children are walking in the truth. And so apparently some people came to John and said, hey, this Gaius guy over here, he's doing well. He's walking in the truth. And we know that there was a contested situation where some people were saying one thing and others another. Gaius apparently agrees with John. Beloved, it is a faithful thing you do in all your efforts for these brothers, strangers as they are, who testified to your love before the church. So apparently these guys that John's talking about, who brought the report, had stopped by, and Gaius had been kind to them. You will do well to send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God. For they have gone out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore we ought to support people like these, that we may be fellow workers for the truth. So apparently they've come back, told John, hey, Gaius is on Team John, and he's being helpful. And so John has sent these guys back and sent them to Gaius with this letter, thanking Gaius for the help and encouraging Gaius to help them some more. I have written something to the church, but Diotrephes, who likes to put himself first, does not acknowledge our authority. We have no idea who Diotrephes is. So if I come, I will bring up what he is doing, talking wicked nonsense against us, and not content with that, he refuses to welcome the brothers and also stops those who want to and puts them out of the church. So things are getting kind of tense at, St. John's Church down the road. Beloved, do not imitate evil, but imitate good. Whoever does good is from God, and whoever does evil has not seen God. Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself. We also add our testimony, and you know that our testimony is true. So we think the guy who's carrying the letter is named Demetrius, and this is his letter to Gaius, saying, Gaius, help out Demetrius here. I had much to write to you, but I'd rather not write with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon, and we will talk face to face. Peace be to you. The friends greet you. Greet the friends, each by name. End of the letter. I mean, I can kind of see why some people would say, it's a fine letter. He doesn't say anything wrong. He encourages Gaius to be hospitable to the truth speakers and to be a kind and generous and good guy. Nothing wrong with that. But does it really rise to Bible? And I mean, I think we kind of ask that question of ourselves too, because, 3 John, does it ever occur on the Sunday morning reading cycle that we follow? I don't think it does. And if we don't read it, is it really Bible? We could ask some of those same questions of things like the Song of Songs or Lamentations, some of these smaller books in the Old Testament. that maybe only get heard once every 3 years. And this one doesn't even get heard. What makes something Bible for us? Not just, okay, it's listed in this book of 66 books of the Bible. Well, that's one way to count it. But is it also Bible if we read it and we listen to it authoritatively? And if we're not listening to it authoritatively, what do we say about that? Those are worthy questions to consider as we think about the Bible. In the 1700s, we found a document kind of buried in another document called the Muratorian Canon. And it was a list of all the books that were in the New Testament. And it appears to come from about maybe 3 or 4 decades after Marcion showed up with his weird ideas. And it lists out the 27 books you know as New Testament. Very, very early, within actually like one step removed living memory of the apostles. This document was written while Irenaeus was writing, and Irenaeus was the disciple of a fellow named Polycarp, and Polycarp was the disciple of John, the writer of the 4th Gospel, and the disciple of Jesus. And that's a fairly short stretch, and they're at that point saying, yeah, these are the 27 books we call Bible. Let's talk about this on Sunday, and next week let's talk a little bit about some of those didn't quite make it in books. We'll have a few and we'll share them with you. God bless you.